Hey there.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Apologies for the late start there. Ran overtime on a previous engagement. Let's see. Eric, I admitted everyone into the room. Should we wait to see if we get a couple of more? There we go. We got one more.
Yeah, maybe give it like a couple minutes. Maybe start at 12:10.
Sure. Sounds like we have some background noise from someone. If you could please mute. If someone's driving. There we go. Eric, how's everything going on your end?
It's windy today. Very
Yeah.
windy. Everything's good though. It's had a really busy start to the school year. So what about you?
You started last week, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Week before that.
A week before that. Okay. Yeah, same here. It's a little bit slow start to the year actually, but things are going to pick up for sure in the coming weeks.
Yeah. Erica let me know that she wouldn't be attending today, but we do have Rosea, Laura, and Annabelle.
Great.
And some other guests.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay, we can go ahead and get started. It's 12:10 now.
Sounds great. Eric, do you have any introductory announcements or anything like that?
Just if you all have not yet signed up for the Career Launchpad, please do so. Sahil will talk about it a little bit in his presentation briefly. So if you have any questions about that, we'll give you some time at the end.
Great. Let me just go ahead and share the link. That's the link, everyone, in the chat to sign up for the course if you haven't already. This is part, just for some context, this is part of a monthly webinar series that we're doing with NDNU on how to really recruit in the modern way and kind of dispelling a lot of the common myths about the recruiting process for finding that job or internship as a college student or graduate student. And so every month we have these topics. This is our 6th one where we cover one specific aspect of the recruiting process. Today's focus is going to be on the interview side. Of course, in the past, we've covered everything from how to figure out what you want to do, how to conduct research, how to reach out to professionals. So if you missed those should be up on NDNU's site if you need. If you have any questions on accessing them, feel free to comment in the chat, and Eric, I'm sure, can help you out. And in addition, a lot of the material in these monthly webinars is somewhat similar to what you would find in the online course. Only the online course goes into a lot more detail, and it gives you the step-by-step action plan to actually make the changes that you need to see the results that you want. So I'll talk more about that at the end, but for now, let's go ahead and dive into today's presentation on interviewing. So just going to go ahead and share my screen here. 1 second, guys. There we go. All right, Eric, just to check to see if you can see my presentation.
Yep, we got it.
Awesome. Okay, great. And just as a heads up, this call will be recorded for future reference for other NDNU students. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And any questions at any point, feel free to insert into the chat and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So today's agenda, I'm going to go through a quick introduction about myself. Apologies if you've heard this before. I think for those who are new on the call, always helpful to learn a little bit about the speaker and their background and why they feel they're coming from a place of credibility. Then going into the actual presentation and wrapping up with the conclusion where we'll talk about the actual Career Launchpad course. So our goal for you today is simple. Number one, learn how to prepare for an interview to maximize that first impression that we all know is so critical. And then, of course, converting more interviews to offers by having that stellar kind of breakout interview performance. I will say interviewing is perhaps my most favorite part of the recruiting process. I know it's really weird. I routinely interview with firms on almost a monthly or bi-monthly basis, even though I have a great kind of job as is. I just kind of love exercising that muscle, getting to meet professionals in other areas. So I would encourage all of you, not only while you're looking for an internship or job, but also when you do have that job that you're fairly comfortable with, it doesn't hurt to interview to see, what kind of offers are out there, meet people. So I think one of the goals of today is to change your mindset from, interviewing as a necessary evil of trying to find a job to how it can actually be really fun and a cool way to meet people if you seem really prepared, and it takes away some of that anxiety. So some quick background, my brother and I have put this program together called the Career Launchpad. He is a product manager at LinkedIn, and he went to Berkeley and worked at a number of great companies from Disney to Levi's. And he is basically in that business operations product manager type role. Myself, I work at Netflix today as part of our marketing strategy team in the US, helping with our original series and stand-up comedy specials. So really fun career in entertainment. Prior to that, I was at Discovery Channel. And prior to that, I was in business consulting at LEK. And then started my college career at UCLA. So together across both of us, we have over 12 years of collective experience helping students like you launch their careers. I know our backgrounds come across as very sort of business focused, consulting, tech, but I can assure you we've helped students in the nonprofit space and teaching and healthcare and engineering and everything in between. So these are kind of foundational principles that apply no matter what you're going for, which I think was another reason why NDNU wanted to make this available to students, especially in light of COVID. Is just that extra bump, that extra edge that you can get in the recruiting process, no matter what you're going for. So some quick background about me. Again, apologies if you've heard this before. Growing up in high school, I was a marching band nerd, and I spent a lot of time in music. That's a picture of me at the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona for a marching band tournament. Yes, there were actually tournaments. That's how nerdy these things got. And then on the right-hand side is a snapshot of an email I got from UCLA after applying in high school. Long story short, because I never really took academics seriously and spent so much time on music, didn't really have the academic qualifications to get into UCLA, so it wasn't really a surprise when I got that letter. However, a couple of weeks after getting that letter, the music director at UCLA, who runs the marching band for UCLA, saw a clip of me on YouTube playing the saxophone and said, you know what, we could use a great, saxophonist to join the marching band. How would you like to join? And I said, well, I haven't got into the university. He's like, don't worry about that. Just give an audition and we'll figure out if you're good enough to come in. And long story short, I was able to get in through the back door just a couple of weeks later. So kind of, obviously a blessing and a curse getting into my dream school kind of on a fluke backdoor basis. But I'm sure many of you can imagine, if you think back to your time on campus at NDNU, maybe that first class that you had. For me, it was in a huge lecture hall. It was a chemistry class being surrounded by literally hundreds of students on either side who on paper were smarter than me and more likely to succeed because they had actually gotten into the university and its rigorous kind of application requirements. And I was kind of this backdoor admit. And so, I thought my freshman year, forget about finding a job. How am I just not going to flunk out of school? And how am I going to survive? And that kind of mentality really hurt me my freshman year in terms of, I thought of it as me versus everyone else. I was being unnecessarily competitive. I wasn't good at it either. It's not like I was being competitive and winning in school. I was struggling. And that freshman year summer, when I came back to my hometown, I really reflected on, you know what, this isn't working. I have 3 more years here. Why don't I just embrace my imposter syndrome, that idea that I'm not supposed to be here? And how would a student act if he or she was placed on a campus where they weren't supposed to be, but it was their dream campus? How would they kind of take advantage of every opportunity given to them? How would they learn from others around them and really act like a sponge and acknowledge that, hey, there are smart people around me everywhere. Instead of trying to compete against them, why not try to learn from them and accomplish things together? And that really changed my mentality. So from me versus everyone else to me and everyone else versus tough problems or fun opportunities or things like that. And so I started taking a lot of leadership positions in student groups and business clubs and things like that, and started to learn more about consulting as a career path. And my junior year, I applied to a consulting internship that was fairly competitive. In fact, the company was listed on Glassdoor's top 25 most difficult companies to interview with in the country, LEK Consulting. If you can see my mouse right over here, right below Teach for America. So all of the strategies and the recruiting tips that I'm going to give you today and in the course have been battle tested in some of the most competitive environments out there. Again, top 25 most difficult companies to interview with in the country. And then I also have this email snapshot, which I thought was pretty fun. That junior year summer, the week before starting my internship with that firm, we got this email from HR at LEK talking about the national training that was going to happen. So everyone in the country who got an offer from LEK, we would go to this retreat in the Northeast for a week to learn the nuts and bolts about consulting. And I just kind of had a reflective moment and just kind of saw some of the other names, the schools and the brands here on this email. I mean, MIT, NYU, Stanford, Chicago, Booth, Dartmouth, like a lot of really Yale, insane brand names. And I thought, like, what the heck was I doing here as a almost reject to UCLA, surrounded by all these really, really smart and talented students? And that's when I realized that, you know, academic merits only get you so far. And it's more so, especially in the world of professionalism and career building, it's more about what you accomplish and the problems that you try to solve and the leadership experiences that you get that really differentiate you. So that was just a cool kind of reflection moment for me to see myself with a bunch of peers. And I can tell you, after working at LEK for 4 years, it was a pressure cooker environment in terms of being surrounded by even more kind of an intellectual audience. But I loved it. It shaped who I am today. And it was such a privilege to get to be a part of that entire program. So long story short, I'll stop talking about myself. We figured out the hard stuff so that you don't have to. And so with that, let's go ahead and get into the presentation. I'm just going to go ahead and look in the chat real quick to see if we have any issues with the audio or anything like that. Nope. Okay. Okay, so before we get into intense interview preparation, be sure to check out these 2 resources that we mentioned in previous webinars. I just want to flag those because we covered them in great detail previously. I'm not going to spend too much time on them today, but I think they're super important to the interview process. The first one is in webinar number 3. We covered how to conduct online research to quickly get smart on your target company. So this is something that I do and I recommend everyone do before they have an actual interview with an employer. Always run a Google News search on them, look at their company websites, maybe even try to see if they have anything on YouTube or Reddit or Quora. Typically, if it's like a big public company, like I know Oracle was on campus recently, they're going to have a lot of information online. If it's a smaller startup or a nonprofit, maybe not. But I think the way that you can get around that is just researching the space overall. So for example, if it's a nonprofit in the sustainability space, specifically, and let's call it fashion and textiles, there's so much information out there that you can kind of learn from in preparation for your interview that might not be company specific, but it's industry specific. So I just want to kind of plug in webinar number 3. If you haven't had a chance to see that, check that one out, where we kind of talk about how to conduct and make use of all the incredible online research that you have available to you at your fingertips. Next, we also talked about how Glassdoor can be a helpful source to learn about potential interview questions. This is really important, especially again for those bigger companies. I have all of my student clients for career coaching do this exercise. So here's an example from a consulting firm called Mercer. And if you just Glassdoor search Mercer on glassdoor.com, it's kind of like Amazon, where you get to see, company reviews and interview experience reviews. And here's an example that I kind of pasted here from someone who was interviewing for a talent analyst role. And they basically describe their interview experience, and they literally give the exact questions they were asked. And so this is just one example, but over here you can see there's 433 interview reviews. And so what I have my clients go through is literally every single one of these reviews, and they just copy paste any questions that they see posted into a separate Google Doc, and they kind of consolidate those questions into the most common ones. And you basically already have a pretty solid idea of what you're going to get asked. And it's kind of the equivalent of, if you put your college student hat on, getting the exam before the actual exam date. So this can really help you kind of prepare and learn what kind of things do employers value when interviewing candidates. And it's not going to be 100% correct, but the point is you're getting a good flavor, and it kind of reduces uncertainty, which I think is the key here. So again, it's a great resource, glassdoor.com, especially for bigger companies. Even for smaller companies, if you do reach out to alumni, which we covered in a previous webinar, feel free to ask them, by the way, I'm thinking about applying at the company that you used to work for or the company you work for today. Can you have any guidance on like how the recruiting process works, what they value in candidates, things they look for? These are all questions you can ask to prepare for the exam well before the actual interview date. So I think Glassdoor is a really great resource to keep in mind. Okay, so now that we have those two sources out of the way, let's move on to actual interview preparation best practices. So after this section, you're going to transform in the following way. You're going to go from maybe being nervous about interviewing, having a poor first impression and probably not getting an offer, to interviewing with rockstar confidence, having fun, and landing way more offers because of your performance. So simply put, most interviews across industries use the following breakdown. The first 5 minutes is typically spent on small talk, understanding where you're from, anything going on that week for you, that kind of thing, just getting to know you as a person. So kind of easy stuff. The next 10 minutes are what we call behavioral questions. And if you don't know what that is, that's totally fine. We're going to explain it. An idea of this is like, tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume. Tell me about a time when. So these are kind of questions to understand your personality. And then the next 10 minutes are spent on technical questions. So this is typically for technical fields like finance or healthcare, or maybe even teaching for curriculum design. Technical questions, the goal of those are to understand your critical thinking required for the job itself. So for a financial analyst position, they might say, can you run me through an example income statement? For my consulting interviews, a technical question was, how many bottles of hot sauce does Chipotle need on a daily basis across the country? And what is the dollar value of that? So these are just critical thinking exercises to see, do you have the right skill set for the job? So again, behavioral is more about your personality, and technical is more about that critical thinking skill set. And then the last 5 minutes are a chance for you to ask questions of the other person. So I think the big takeaway here is I can probably bet 90% of your interviews that you're going to have, regardless of the industry you're in, are going to follow this template, just in a little bit of a modification. So you can kind of use this as a good conceptual framework for how to sort of prepare for the interview. So we're going to focus specifically today on behavioral questions. And again, we cover everything else in the course, but for today, here are a couple of common behavioral questions you absolutely need to master, because you should expect to get these questions regardless of what interview you're in. Number one, tell me about yourself. Number two, why do you want to work for our company specifically? Number three, what Rohan and I call resume deep dives. This is where the interviewer might have a copy of your resume in front of them, and he or she might like ask you about specific opportunities, like, oh, you led this student group at NDNU. Tell me more about that. What was your role, and what kind of problems did you help tackle? So kind of diving deep on your experience. Number four are personal experience and leadership questions. So these are things like, tell me about a time when, ... And we'll go through those as well. And then lastly are just random question and answers that the interviewer might have just out of curiosity. So in this training, we're going to deep dive on the first question, which is tell me about yourself, and the fourth one, which are the range of personal experience and leadership questions. So the secret to nailing tell me about yourself is as follows. And by the way, this is the most misunderstood question of them all. The litmus test should be that after you give your answer, it should almost sound like you were born for this specific job. And to do this tactically, you need to craft a concise 2-minute story with your unique value proposition about who you are as a person and what makes you so interested in this job. And also support that with 1 or 2 brief examples. They can be work experience, they can be just research that you've done that you found fascinating, it can be people that you've talked to. So I think for those of you that are listening today and think, oh, well, I don't have that great of a resume or don't have a ton of experience, that's totally fine. You can always give examples in terms of your intellectual curiosity. And then you kind of wrap up with, and that's why I'm here today. So literally a good answer to tell me about yourself should end with the phrase word for word, and that's why I'm here today, because it forces you to kind of bring your personal background back into the present moment and make it really relevant to the interviewer. And I think the goal here in terms of tone is to strike a balance between pitching and being conversational. No one likes to try hard. So you want to use adjectives to avoid yourself saying, I'm a hard worker, I'm diligent, whatever. Those are kind of fluff words that mean different things to different people. It'd be more important to the interviewer to understand what you've accomplished and also sort of reflection moments that you've had at various points along your career that make you realize why you're applying for the job today. And just a quick note on this slide in terms of the 2-minute parentheses over here. Just as a frame of reference, every interview question you answer, no matter what it is, should be 2 minutes or less. There is really no reason for your interview answers to be more than 2 minutes. Sometimes, and I've been on the other side of the table where college students especially love to go on like a 5 or 10 minute rant about their hometown and where they're from. And that's great. But honestly, in a 30-minute interview, it needs to be very concise, as well as all your other answers. And the trick is, by being concise up front, you let the interviewer decide where to probe and where to push further. You don't want to assume that the interviewer is going to want all the detail in the world. And so by keeping things high level and just enough detail to keep the story going, that's going to show a lot of emotional maturity, a lot of storytelling and communication maturity. And it's going to also allow the interviewer to pick and choose where he or she wants to go with this. So I think that's just a note that I like to emphasize. And you can time yourself, very easy to do. Chances are, if you take some of these principles and practice and you try to actually write out your answers and memorize them and practice them, you're going to go over like probably 4 to 5 minutes, and that's okay. And the magic comes when you try to cut that down into just a very pithy and concise 2-minute story with your unique value prop. And the reason why this is so important is because it is often the first question you get asked in the interview. So if you can appear very clear and structured and polished in your response, you're going to strike just such a good first impression that the rest of the interview is going to go very, very well. And the cool part is, tell me about yourself is basically guaranteed for every job. I have yet to have a job interview where someone didn't want to know about who I was or my background. And so you can pretty much bet that if you were to spend a couple hours really, really being thoughtful about this answer, it will pay dividends later on in your recruiting life, because you're always going to get asked this question. So an advanced tip on top of all that is to preempt the other person's prejudice and address it with your narrative immediately. So what does this actually mean? Let's say you were to look at your resume, and you really have to put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter or an interviewer and think, okay, if I saw Sahil's resume, what's one thing that's especially weak about his resume that I would want to question him on? Is it the GPA? Is it a gap in experience? Is it the fact that Sahil majored in chemistry but is here for a sales job? Try to think about why people wouldn't hire you, and try to incorporate that kind of data into tell me about yourself. And by preempting sort of their objection, it'll show super hyper self-awareness, and also just the idea that, listen, you know where your shortcomings are, but you have an explanation for it. So I think it's a really cool advanced tip. It's okay if you don't get to this level immediately. I think it'll be more relevant when you come time for those full-time roles, and even after your time after college, when you're in your 20s and 30s. So just kind of an advanced tip there, and just kind of more of a sales tactic to preempt other people's objections. Okay, so that's all good in theory, but what I wanted to do is provide a sample answer to tell me about yourself. So here's kind of my example. I'll briefly sort of run through my personal example here, but this slide is here for you to reference in case you want to follow the structure. And so I'll read the answer, and then I'll basically pause and comment on some of the mechanics and secret things that I did so that you can replicate them. So let's say I'm interviewing for a role at Netflix's marketing strategy team, like I was a couple of years ago. And so the interviewer says, okay, Sahil, tell me about yourself. Here's where I would say, okay, great. My name is Sahil. I went to UCLA, and during college, I was really curious about the intersection between entertainment and the business side of entertainment, specifically digital content consumption. We all know back in 2013, streaming was just becoming really popular. People were still using DVDs and watching cable TV, and it was just at the breaking point of becoming really mainstream. And so my career hypothesis, another term, by the way, that we talked about in a previous webinar, my career hypothesis coming out of college was, really having a passion for helping scale direct-to-consumer businesses, specifically in media and entertainment. And so to go from there, I started my career at LEK Consulting. We were a management consulting firm in Los Angeles focused on helping our clients think about digital opportunities in the media space, working with film studios, TV networks, and sports leagues, really helping them build that direct-to-consumer muscle. And during my time at LEK, over 30 engagements, I really built this skill set of quickly breaking down complex business questions into simple components and tackling them through both qualitative and quantitative research. So I got pretty good at drinking from the fire hose and quickly understanding what matters when trying to tackle a business problem. After 30 engagements, though, got kind of bored and decided to go over to an actual entertainment company where I was at Discovery Channel. And so I wanted to see what it was like to transform a traditional media company in the digital world. And so at Discovery, my role was to help channel executives across the world create business plans for their own direct-to-consumer products. So instead of watching Discovery Channel through your cable provider like Comcast, you could watch Discovery Channel by paying us $5 a month or $10 a month, much like you do Netflix. And that really taught me that whole process, how to drive change in a very traditional corporate environment. But at the end of the day, I was still left craving more learning and impact from people that were doing it at an industry leading caliber. And that's what led me to Netflix and why I'm here today. I'd really love to learn from the leading player in the direct to consumer streaming space. I'd love to build on my traditional marketing experience with more digital native forms of promotion and just be back in that fast paced environment where it's a tech company and things are moving quickly with large data sets to work with. I just find that fascinating. So those are a couple of the reasons why I'm interviewing here today. So I'll pause there because I know I just talked my mouth off. It wasn't the most eloquent because I was kind of just trying to work through the mechanics live with you. It was about probably, if I were to time that, 3.5 minutes, so I could chop that down a little bit. So a couple of things I want to call out here. Number one, the brief personal background. Often just starting off with your school and your major and what you think you're interested in is enough. Then you go into your career hypothesis. If you're not sure what this phrase means, essentially all it means is what do you think you want to do after you graduate? And so we have a specific webinar on that. That's actually webinar number 1, covers that. And so essentially just stating, hey, my career hypothesis, I'd love to have a career in helping scale direct to consumer businesses. And then I talk about one professional experience at LEK. I talk about what my job was, my responsibilities were, and then I sort of reflect in part B on what did I learn, what did I take away, and what led me to the next move. So that's kind of the important part. The A is the responsibilities, and the B is what did I learn and take away, and what was that moment of reflection. Then I go into Discovery Channel, where again, I talk about an A and B, what was my responsibility and why did I move to Discovery? And then in part C, I say, what did I learn and what was my reflection moment? And then I kind of talk about that's why I'm here today. Remember that exact phrase, really tying it back to the current moment. And again, giving some rationales onto why I want to work at Netflix, specifically in the marketing team. So you can kind of see that structure of tell me about yourself is a combination of sharing your personal background, your career interests, but then also painting a picture for the interviewer of how your thinking has evolved with regards to your career, things that you liked, things that you didn't like so much, and how over the years or over the experiences, you got closer and closer to what you did like, and that led you to the current moment. So you can take this template and use it for your own. I would highly encourage you to do the prep work and the tell me about yourself question, because there's nothing better than starting off the interview with a question that you know you're going to get and then absolutely knocking it out of the park and just really impressing people with your clarity. So this is probably the most important part of today's presentation, is mastering this question. Okay, and so now we're going to talk about personal experience questions. These are things like, tell me about a time when you led a team, when you failed, when you've managed conflict, persuaded someone, or push yourself. There's an endless amount of iterations and permutations I can tell you that you can prepare for. But you don't really want to do this because you're going to have like 100 different ways in which you can prepare for questions, and it's just going to be a nightmare. Like, how can you possibly predict what they're going to ask you when it comes to personal experience? So the trick is to have 3 to 5 stories in your back pocket and adapt them to the question live. So let me explain that. Instead of trying to prepare an answer for all of these questions, in addition to the 25 others that probably exist, you really only need, let's call it 3 stories. The first one is, when's a time when you led a group of people? When's a time when you failed? Absolutely. You like failed at something. And then thirdly is, when's a time when you had to persuade someone, either because of a disagreement or there was a challenge of opinions, and you actually had to use debate skills and thinking skills and communication skills to persuade them. So again, leading, failure, and persuading. If you have those 3 stories, from my experience and from Rowan's experience, you're going to be able to answer most of these questions, and you're just going to tweak them on the fly. And that's kind of the cool hack to preparing for the behavioral part of the interview or the personal experience questions. So, in terms of the framework that you want to use when giving your answer, here's something that you can follow. And literally the way that you would prepare this is copy these bullet points 3 times, one for each story: lead, failure, and persuasion, and then just fill in the bullet points for your story as you have them. So the way you start off, so let's say, tell me about a time when you led a group of people. So the first thing that you want to do is state the learned lesson that directly addresses the interviewer's question. So for example, okay, well, let me tell you about a time when I had to lead a group project at NDNU, and I learned the importance of over communication. So right there, the first sentence, you're telling the interviewer the ending of the story. And the reason why you want to do this is because oftentimes students get caught up in telling like a verbose story that's like 10 minutes long about this group project that they did and things didn't go as planned. And they often forget the original question. And the interviewer is just sitting there like, when is this person going to get to the point? Like what is this? Is this even answering my question? So this framework forces you to answer the question first and then get into the story. So you're giving the moral of the story, which is, I learned the importance of over communication, and that's when I led a group of people in a group project. And then you kind of go into the setup. So who was involved, my peers and this class, what was an assignment, why were we doing it? It was a big part of our final grade, for example. Then you kind of build up to the conflict. So the professor gave us like the entire semester to work on the project. We didn't really stay in touch until the very last 2 weeks of the semester, when we realized that no one had done any work, and we were kind of just hitting up against his deadline. And the conflict came when we weren't really sure like where to start. With the limited amount of time that we had, we weren't sure how we could divvy up the work, and it was just a mess. And we were all at risk of failing the class within just days if we didn't get our stuff together. And so how did you resolve it? And this should be the most detailed part. And I'm, by the way, just making this up just for the sake of example. So I kind of stepped up, and in my group of 5 students, I basically just laid out everything we needed to accomplish to tackle the group project, from the research phase to the outline phase to the presentation building phase to the how are we going to present it. And I basically divvied up the work based on everyone's interests and strengths. So some person was really good at research, the other person really wanted to structure the arguments or the point of view that we were going to have, and then I just made sure that we were all being communicative. And so we basically met every day after class for about 3 to 4 hours in the library, just kind of working on this thing together. And just by staying in lockstep and really focusing on what we're driving towards and letting people own their own work streams and delegating it like that really helped people have ownership and got us the result that we needed faster. And the outcome was we ended up getting a B in the project that we were almost all going to fail. And it just taught me, more importantly, that the importance of over communication, not waiting until the last minute, and just stepping up when there is a vacuum of leadership. I think were all skills that I hope to take with me when I apply for my next job. So again, guys, totally made that up, sort of BS, but hopefully you get the point of what I was trying to communicate, and just an example that most students tend to have from a group project. And again, remember what I did there. The last bullet point I said restated that learned lesson again and directly answered the interview's question of, And that's one time when I led where I learned the importance of over communication. So this is a tried and true framework. Again, it's going to work with any story that you have. So the action item here is to just copy these bullet points into a Word doc 3 times over and prepare a story for one time you led, one time you failed outright, and one time you persuaded a group of people. And again, the key point for all these stories is to talk about the moral. What did you learn that you hope to take with you in your professional life? So that's kind of how you would tackle the personal experience questions there. And here's how you know you've nailed it. Again, concise and structured, keeping it around 2 to 3 minutes. Again, your interview answer should always be very concise. The stories are adaptable and can be used for multiple questions. So, even if I do have this leadership story, you can notice I can actually use that story looking back now. Tell me about a time when you worked in a team and had to manage a conflict. That story that I just told all of you actually works in that situation. Tell me about a time when you had to push yourself to overcome a challenge. That story could work too. You might just play up the dynamic of needing to lead other people when there wasn't a formal leadership title there, right? Or persuading a group of people and changing their minds that like, hey, we're going to fail if we don't do this group project in like 10 days. So here's my point of view on how we should divvy up the work and accomplish things. So you can kind of see how that story can be molded into the answer of any of these questions. And that's the secret to really attacking and preparing behavioral interview questions. You want to use I liberally. This is not the time to be humble or talk about what other people did. The interviewer wants to know what your contributions were specifically. Again, you address the question directly with your nugget or learned lesson and the result. Remember the moral of the story. And that's kind of the next bullet here too, is throw in a learning for bonus points. So I told you I learned the importance of over communication when leading a group of people, and be ready to go deep. Remember that in this template, how you resolve the conflict or the actual plot of the story, this is where the interviewer gets to learn more about your personality, the skill sets that you have. So be prepared to walk through, okay, well, how did you delegate the work? Who built the outline? How did you prepare for the presentation? Who did the research? What was your role in that? Was there any conflicts? It's like prepare to go really deep. And again, this should be easy because it's all based on your own experience, no one else's. And so prepping for personal experience questions takes a fair amount of time, but once you do it, it'll pay off for every interview you do. We totally promise. These are kind of things that you invest a little bit of time ahead up front, and then every interview you have will have some flavor of this question, and you'll be so good at just spitting out the answer. And one note about this, prep, when prepping both the tell me about yourself as well as the personal experience questions, you want to kind of write them out in bullet point form and memorize or just internalize the bullet points. You want to avoid writing entire paragraphs and memorizing those. The reason why is because if you just remember the bullet points, kind of like if you remember you had index cards in grade school to remember presentations, that way, every time that you say the answer will be slightly different. And that's what gives it its human quality of being natural and more conversational. Whereas if you kind of just memorize a couple of paragraphs and then you read them verbatim, like you're an actor in a script in a movie, it's going to sound very canned and over prepared. And so that's just one additional pro tip that I would have for you is prepare your answers in bullet point form, internalize the bullets, but make it so that every time you say the answer, it's just somewhat different. And again, that'll make it seem a lot more natural while still being structured. Okay, so that's basically all we wanted to cover today. Again, we go a lot more in detail on the actual course. And to that end, you kind of have two options. For those of you who still haven't signed up for the course, we know that graduation or summertime is coming up soon, even if you're not a senior. And so you can kind of go it alone and spend months trying to figure this stuff out, from interviewing to researching to negotiating your job offer and potentially blowing opportunities with companies you actually want to work for. Or you can learn the proven method from Rohan and I, where we help students like you in some of the world's most competitive industries. And remember that it takes the average student 3 to 6 months to find a job. So this is not something you want to put off until graduation. You want to start now, whether you're a senior, a junior, a freshman, or even in grad school. The earlier you start, the more you'll master these skill sets like interviewing, which is what we talked about today. And so at this point, we'd like to introduce the Career Launchpad program. And so this program is basically about how to land a job or internship in a highly competitive industry as an undergraduate in just a matter of weeks. Also, it works for grad students, so we should tweak that. It's over 20 video modules, and it's kind of recorded videos like these, templates, best practices, literally everything you need to learn to recruit really in a killer way. And you can access the content, of course, anytime, anywhere you want. And here's just a smattering of what we cover. You'll see we start off with how to discover your dream job, how to create a networking strategy, writing a resume and cover letter. We go deep on how to actually interview, so a lot more detail than what we did today. How to kind of negotiate and choose a job offer, how to manage your career during COVID, and then some other modules that are coming up soon as well. So really comprehensive program. And so typically we charge students $397, and they pay this price every day when we sell the course to students outside of NDNU. But thankfully, as an NDNU student, they made the program completely free. So 100% off. It's absolutely free, and it's up to you to use it and take advantage of it, because there are peers across the country that are using this information to get an edge. So again, whether you're a freshman or a graduate student, you can apply a lot of these tips today to start seeing results even during COVID. So with that, I'll go ahead and exit out of the presentation, and you'll see the link in the chat again from the earlier part of the presentation. You can click on that link and sign up. If you have any issues, feel free to let myself or Eric know, but we'd love to kind of have you on the program. We also have a Facebook group that we'll invite you to once you join the program, and you can kind of ask your questions there to Rohan and I directly. And of course, this is just number 6 of our monthly webinar series. So keep on attending these. Tell your friends if you found it helpful. And at this point, we'll open it up for questions. So thanks, everyone.
I know you said, hi, I'm Kevin, by the way. I'm sorry I
Hey,
missed
Kevin.
a bit earlier part of the meeting. Thank you for giving this presentation. This is great. I kind of wish I'm in medical school right now, and I'm kind of wish I had this information before all of my my residency interviews the last couple of months. I probably could have saved some time during interviews. When you gave that story earlier about your personal story as the leading question, I thought that was great. And you did mention that you kind of came up with it on the fly right there. And as far as that specific one, I think that something that's been drilled into me with having so many interviews and different jobs over the years is like trying to make sure you paint the previous work that you've done in the best light that you can. Do you feel like that's still something that is applicable these days? As far, and the specific thing that stuck out for me was saying like, I was at this the LEK thing. You did 30 engagements, and after X years, you got bored. Is there a way that you, or like an approach that you recommend students or any applicants or interviewees apply to kind of like work, state that way in maybe a way that is kind of talks up that, or maybe just doesn't say that you were bored by the job or that way. Do you understand what I'm trying to
Yeah,
ask?
yeah, totally.
To say that, obviously with the example, it was a quick and dirty one. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I understand the intent of the question, which is you want to be professional at all times, and you just want to say, I got bored, and so I tried something new. And so I will answer that. I will say, however, that I've actually used that line in many interviews, and the other person tends to laugh because they kind of get that after 30 engagements, on the 36th one, it becomes a little bit less interesting. So I definitely change up the phrasing a bit. Sometimes I've used bored. Other times I've said the 36th one got a little bit less interesting, hitting diminishing returns. And I kind of poke fun at that. And as long as you kind of move the narrative forward and you don't have a negative tone, I think it strikes the right balance of being humorous versus like totally being a negative person. But I do get your question again that I want to answer, which is maybe not everyone's comfortable with infusing that kind of humor. And I think the point is when you're talking about your experiences in the tell me about yourself question, actually, it's not so important to kind of say everything that you accomplished with every job posting, like, okay, at LEK, I helped my clients do X, Y, and Z and go into detail. Again, it's more so that high level of what was your main responsibility and what did you learn? And how did that kind of experience shape where you took your career? Because you're kind of telling a narrative about your personal journey. And that's why the person asked the question. Because at the end of the day, oftentimes what happens is I'll say the tell me about yourself. I'll just kind of give the here's my responsibility. Here's what I enjoyed about it, and here's what I took away from me and why I moved to the next experience on my resume, which is Discovery Channel. Then after I answer the question, the interviewer will say, oh, okay, interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about those engagements at LEK and what specific problems you helped tackle? And so I let the interviewer dive deep on my accomplishments rather than me having to top them up and then kind of risk expanding the answer to the question to like 5 minutes. Does that make sense?
Definitely. It seems to provide a roadmap for where
Exactly.
they can go next. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I know that was a more tactical question than I asked, and keeping that big picture strategy is helpful.
No worries. It's a great question. And I think the key there again is to be, I think students often have to overcorrect on how concise they need these answers to be. It's like, tell me your life story in 2 minutes. It's like, holy crap, like, how do you do that? And by the way,
1991.
yeah, exactly. I've heard that before, and it's like, okay, brace for a 15-minute story. But I think it's also important to understand that, especially for students that are listening right now, it only gets harder because you're only going to get more life experience. So I think that skill set is really difficult to kind of, and we've heard that term, the 30-second elevator pitch. That's even a more abridged version of this. But again, the key here is to provide just enough detail about who you are as a person that it piques the interviewer's interest and they want to explore further, and let them drive the questioning rather than you preempting it. Great question.
I missed your previous, if anyone, please someone jump in if they have another question.
Nope, go ahead.
I missed your previous webinar with about the professional hypothesis, and that just in a nutshell to me seems like this is my idea for what is going to be fulfilling and how I can be of service to other people, and I'm trying it out basically. I think that this would be this X activity would be good, so I'm just pursuing that and seeing if that works out. Is that the hypothesis in a nutshell?
That's right. So again, from a formal definition, a hypothesis is something that you believe to be true that you want to go test out, right? And so in the terms of your career and why we've used that approach with students is because I think a lot of times, especially I felt paralyzed when I was a student of like, crap, I need to figure out exactly what I want to do when I graduate for the next 40 years of my life. And the reality is it's just not true. When you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the average person changes jobs once every 2.5 years. I often joke to students, my job today didn't even exist 10 years ago. And I think we all know how fast the world is changing, especially with COVID. So you can't even plan for 2030, even beyond that. So instead of trying to put this artificial pressure, let's just take a best guess. And so in the webinar and in the course, when we walk through how to create your own career hypothesis, we basically train everyone on saying a good hypothesis starts with, I think I want to become an X in the Y industry. So I think I want to become a healthcare provider in the sports industry. And it's important that that phrase starts with, I think, because it allows yourself to give yourself the permission of like being wrong and just taking action to learn. And so that's some of the principles that we cover in the career hypothesis part of the program. Again, I think that's webinar number 1 and 2, and then also the course module 1 and 2 as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it also allows you, if you use that terminology with employers and interviewers, it actually makes a lot of sense to them because it kind of shows that you're still learning, you're still thinking. So it's like right now I hypothesize that I want to do X, Y, Z. I think sometimes I've had colleagues that, you know, sometimes appear arrogant when you're recruiting for engineering or consulting or investment banking jobs that are quite competitive. And I think students often get the wrong impression. They say, I was 5 years old and I was reading 10Ks of public companies. It's just like, no one does that, get real. Like no one was really born for a specific job. You kind of discover it over time. And so I think it kind of takes off the naivete of many people in terms of thinking that they were, everything about their life led until this moment. I think it's more of a gradual process of self-discovery.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. There's a lot of, sorry, Ro, cutting you off there.
That's okay. Go ahead.
But just a lot of, I've read a lot of personal statements and things like that for medical students thinking like for residency as well as getting into medical school where I was the little kid dressing up at Halloween as a doctor. Like, well, let's talk about like an adult life and like the things you've reflected on instead of like knowing this was something cool from a movie you saw when you were
yeah.
Is that it?
Like,
yeah, no, I think that's right. But also, it's okay to say those kind of things, but then you have to back it up with what recent experience did you have in college that backed that up. It can't just be, your parents were a doctor and so you wanted to be a doctor. That's not a good reason.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that I think also to during these interviews and just even in the application process, just removing the pressure for students. At least I know when I was coming out of undergrad, me thinking that I needed to have, which is it's great to have experience in a lot of ways, but also a lot of the experience that we have is, based in other parts. Like we can pick it from like leadership, like if you're involved in leadership at school, like like how to basically get that as experience for the job that you're applying for, rather it being like you have rather than it being like, oh, you have all these jobs, because I think that that tends to scare a lot of students or a lot of folks, as far as like, oh, I'm not experienced enough or I don't have enough experience. But I think it's understanding that most of these companies also want you to be flexible and adaptable, and to really like say like, hey, I might not know like everything about like Apple, for example, but I want to apply because I really enjoy the mission, and I want to, and I know that I'm quick to pick up on certain things, and I'll be dedicated to learning what it is I need to do for this position. So sometimes like that in itself is more valuable. So I just wanted to put that out there too for students.
That's great. A couple of follow-up things there. I think it's important for both undergraduates and graduates to understand that employers, for the most part, are not hiring you for your skill set out of college. They're hiring you for your potential. And that's why companies, when they have university recruiting practices and they have dedicated recruiters, they're essentially looking for talent they want to invest in. And so when you share your curiosity, your inherent kind of enthusiasm for something, that's way more important than talking about some accomplishment you had in a student group project. Not to discount your experiences, but in reality, you're going to spend a lot of time in your early part of your career just learning and making mistakes, and that's totally fine. So I think there's no expectation that you need to have all the experience in the world. And I think if an employer is looking for that, by the way, they're probably setting you up for failure. So that's probably a red flag. It's like, we're going to offer $15 an hour and we expect you to operate like a 5-year industry veteran. It's like, that's not a good recipe for success. And then secondarily, to your point around, even if you don't have a lot of experience, remember, sharing your career hypothesis can also come from the research that you've done and the conversations with alum that you've had. It doesn't have to actually be like, okay, if you don't have any internships under your belt or any kind of part-time work, that's okay. Obviously, it would be preferred, but also understand that when you're now over-indexing on your curiosity and your enthusiasm rather than your past experiences, all of a sudden you can do that online research, you can watch YouTube videos, you can meet with employers, and that will be substitutable to not having enough experience for a job. Thanks for the compliment, Rosella. Yeah, happy to chat with any student at any time. I know we got a late start, so I do want to spend a couple more minutes if there are any other questions. So far, these have been amazing. And I know that this is recorded, so students watching after the fact, I'm sure will get benefit from it.
You mentioned that the 3 personal experience stories being leadership, failure, and persuasion being in those camps. Did you, what was the process like for you tinkering around and workshopping different like story themes to try and find those buckets? And if you, I think you mentioned having 3 to 5 stories. If are there 2 backup ones that you feel like would be good, or like 2 other kind of story themes that you would recommend having in the back pocket aside from those 3?
Yeah, I should probably amend. I'll probably adjust the presentation and say, honestly, for starting, 3 is fine. 3 is more than enough, because chances are at any given interview, I've only been asked 2 behavioral interview questions. So it's like, okay, tell me about a time when X, tell me about a time when Y. Very rarely does it get to that 3rd one. So you'll always have an extra in your back pocket. I think when it gets to 5, a lot of students don't have that many experiences yet. So yeah, I'll amend it just to say 3 is good enough. In terms of how I came up with that, Rohan and I kind of did a very informal factor analysis, which is a term used in psychology and surveying. So for example, there are multiple ways you can ask the same question. For example, how tall are you? Or how long is your wingspan? Traditionally, those are typically similar questions. And so what a factor analysis does is if you have a survey of 100 questions, really sometimes you're only asking 10 different questions, just in different ways, in 10 different ways, right? And so when we looked at all the behavioral interview questions, tell me about a time when you led, when you had to persuade someone, manage disagreements, work against a tight deadline, whatever. We kind of just after the years realized that, hey, it really boils down to these three unique things, right? When did you lead, when did you fail, and when did you kind of persuade someone? And even within that, you could say persuading someone and leading are kind of similar. So there's already some fuzziness there. But just having three distinct stories, we feel in our candidate and our clients who have done this, hundreds of times in the actual interview process, these three seem to be like 90% comprehensive for whatever you get asked. So we just kind of stick with those three.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, so it's more so just like reflection, self-discovery. There's no hard science to it.
Sure. No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, forgive me. How much time do we have left?
A couple minutes. I think Tessa had a hand, and then Eric, and then Kevin. Sorry, we can go back to you if you have one final question.
Just a quick question. So, what about when you're interviewing with someone you know? What are your thoughts about that?
Good question. So, in what way would you know this person?
Professor.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, professor. So I'm a graduate student in marriage and family therapy, and I am applying to work with my professor as a colleague. So any thoughts?
Yeah, well, you definitely have an advantage then if you know the other person. I would say not much changes from what I said. I think the things that might change, let's call it two things. Number one, because you know the person, think about what you know about him or her, and maybe some research you can do online, and just kind of try to infuse some of that in either the upfront small talk section or in the questions that you ask at the very end of the interview. If remember the structure of the typical interview, I think that will help just acknowledge that, hey, we know each other. I've done some background homework on you. I've been in your class. You're my professor. It just kind of makes it real. And then secondarily, maybe the tone that you use is a little bit less formal, a little bit more informal, conversational, kind of like you were attending an office hours. But again, don't confuse that with not having structure. So it could just be an office hours type tone, but you're still very prepared and you've taken a lot of the recommendations that we've talked about today in the webinar. And that's where I think to Kevin's point around maybe you don't say you just got bored, but making jokes here and there about your experience, I think would be a little bit more acceptable, especially if you knew the other person. So those are only the two things I think that would change. Sharing any kind of insight you have about their career or what you know about them, and then being a little bit less informal, being a less formal in tone, and kind of acknowledging the relationship that you two have. Cool.
Thanks.
All right, Kevin. Anything else?
Sorry, was someone else gonna jump in? I thought Eric. No. Okay, I misunderstood. So I'm just seeing the emojis now. I didn't realize that those things go up with the. Someone must have raised the hand. Such a boomer. Let's see. Sorry, I forgot what the question I was going to ask.
No worries.
I mean, just in general, it probably helps to have to try and get a partner to be able to rehearse some of this stuff with. It seems like that'd be kind of a natural thing. No, sorry, I forget my question. I should have written it down.
Oh, that's okay. Do you have any other tips for the room, given you're an alumni of NDNU and things that you've seen work particularly well? I think practicing with someone else is definitely a good way to make it seem more natural in front of someone.
Mm-hmm. I think that just one thing I was really glad for having gone to NDNU was that it is such a tiny school that you have an opportunity to be a big fish in a little pond. And I was able to, especially with my work in student council, I felt like I was able to make bigger changes than I may have been able to make at smaller schools and have a bigger impact. Much more of a small town, I feel like I could connect with a lot more people, like the constituents, so to say. So I definitely recommend taking advantage of like trying to pursue something online or for the campus. It's tough now, honestly, with COVID though. I mean, that's a huge challenge that I didn't face. Um, but I think also it seems to the school has a really strong mission towards social justice. I think caring for poor communities, caring for traditionally underserved communities or communities that have faced tougher challenges in general. And I got really involved with a lot of community service efforts when I was there. And I feel like those opportunities for me to get out of the classroom and try and build stories that I could use for my personal experience later down the road. Um, and I was able to leverage connections with the sisterhood to go down and spend some time volunteering in Nicaragua and practicing my Spanish. So like trying to take advantage of the small community can really pay off, I think, in the long run, or even while you're there.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Kevin. I'm also an alumni of the university. And we went to school together at the same time, Kevin and I. And so, yeah, even like practicing, like applying for those, for me at least personally, applying for like leadership opportunities, like being a resident assistant and things of that manner. It really was a good preparation for the workforce because, you know, you had to prepare like, I remember preparing like a portfolio of like what type of events I was going to put on and, you know, things like that. I think really transition into the workforce. So, I mean, I see a lot of our mentors here from STARS, and it's really great because you all are like learning all these skills and are student leaders on campus. I think the only student leaders on campus right now, virtually. But that's great because you're getting all this experience and like you all interviewed for your position as a mentor. And so I think, again, just keeping those practices and what you learned from that is really important.
I know that we're a little bit over time and that I don't know if you wanted to say a couple things, Sahil, but I want to do a little plug.
Yeah.
So Kevin, you talked about like practice. So absolutely, you can't say that you've practiced for an interview if you've not said anything out loud. Like you have to hear your words coming out of your mouth, because no matter how much you think and you read and you practice your script, it is not going to be what you think until it is said from your mouth to your ears. And then test specific advice for interviewing with somebody you know. In your out loud practice, say things like work in the phrases as you know, or from your class, especially if you end up being in an interview with a committee or more than one person for which you know one of them. So you have to establish in front of everybody, even if they already know because they have probably talked to each other, that one of them knows you. But you need to establish in front of everybody, I'm talking this way because I know one of you. Does that make sense? Like without saying that. So like, oh, from Dr. So-and-so's class, which I loved, I learned this, or I did this, or she knows that I'm, you may all not know, but Dr. So-and-so knows my special interest is X. Just stick in one of those phrases to establish that relationship out loud. And then it like makes everything flow a little bit easier. Those things are not easy to put in on the fly. You do have to practice them, even though they should sound like you never thought about it before, you know. Aside from that, tutor.com does interview practice. In their career help subject category, you can get feedback on your resumes and your cover letters, but they also will do like live interview practice. So if you actually need a bounce, like a professional or whatever, like a sounding board, you can use that service to practice your out loud interview. And then they'll give you tips and a trial run. So you could do it with them a couple times before you actually need to interview. It's good and it's free. So use all the resources you have.
Can I hire you, Laura?
No, you don't have to hire me. You can get help for free.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, that's it from my end. Again, this is a recurring series. So our next one in February is actually a very interesting one. It's how to negotiate a job offer. This module alone has helped some of my clients get salaries upwards of $10,000 higher than what they would normally get. Typically, the advice that I'm going to share helps people get in the 4 to 5 figure range of a salary increase, if not immediately, definitely in their next couple of jobs, just being aware of some of these skill sets. So you don't want to miss that one. And I'm sure Eric will be in touch with when that's going to be scheduled in terms of how to sign up and things like that. But at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Eric. Thanks again for attending, everyone.
Thank you, Sahil. And yes, I will be posting it on the Instagram. Also check the student newsletter weekly for any updates for programming, career, tutoring, anything campus related. And I don't have the date off the top of my head, but it is February. I apologize. I'm drawing a blank. 1 second. Looks like we have a February 11th at 12 o'clock.
February 11th.
Thursday. Thank you so much, Sahil.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you later. Thanks, Claudia.
Would it be possible if somebody put the link in the chat for the seminars that was discussed earlier? Coming in late, I didn't. That link wasn't placed in there. I would love to check it out though.
For the previous webinars.
For the previous webinar, you had a slide that said link in the chat. Oh, perfect.
Oh, here you go. Yeah, there you go, Laura.
Kevin, I'm working with marketing right now. I just got to upload now all the videos to YouTube so that they can be put onto our webpage, but they'll be there soon.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for all the work for everybody involved. This is really good stuff. This is
awesome.
Help a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, we're really thankful that NDNU is making the investment here, again, for something that can scale, especially during this time of COVID. And Kevin, I'll connect with you offline. It would be great to stay in touch. And if you can attend future webinars, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. My schedule's getting a little less insane. So I'm looking forward.
All right, take care, everyone. See you later.
There you go.
Bye.